that was very uncomfortable for me, but through that process, leaning into that discomfort, it ended up being a confirmation to me that yes, things have changed in my awareness, in my life, and that experience gave me the kind of the last step that I needed to really accept and understand that I'd pretty much entered a whole new world here.
Welcome to Living God's Light, a podcast to help you strengthen your spirituality and your connection with God. We are so happy to have you as a part of the Living God's Light family. Welcome to the Living God's Light podcast. And today we have our Living God's Light family here. And I'd like to introduce all of us. So I'd like to start with Alan. Alan, can you introduce yourself to the Living God's Light audience and tell us how you came across us and how it's changed your life?
Okay, I'm Alan Smith. I kind of came on the scene about 7 years ago. I met Vinney at a friend's ranch, and we were sitting on the front porch and having a good old chat like we always do. And he shared his experience around dying and coming back. And it was amazing, the experience of starting in that place and hearing all of the remarkable things that he did and saw and heard and learned. And it touched my heart. What did you see when I was doing that, Vinney? As you're telling me, what did you see? Because we've talked about this a lot.
I saw many shells around who you were, and I saw just the conversation itself that you were peeling away those shells. Yeah.
That's how it felt for me too. It was really interesting how all of these layers that I had created and all of these things that I had kind of covered myself with started to peel off and started to kind of clear and be out of that
labels.
space.
They were almost like labels or identities.
That's a really good observation, because they were definitely labels that people had laid on me and that I had laid on myself.
Yeah.
Well, and you'd also had some pretty significant tragedies in your life that you were dealing with.
I had a lot of things in my life that were really hard. I had a son pass away, had a lot of bullying and abuse when I was younger that just were very difficult. So it was interesting to start to experience that light that came in just hearing the story and the immediate changes that it made for me.
And from the outside perspective in, I could see there was an activation of a healer that walked away from that porch that day. And you were always a healer, but you've been healing others since, not just with your words, but your actions and everything. Yeah.
Thank you. You know, it's been interesting. I I've spent about the last 25, 27 years working with people around grief and working with people around all labels and all of those different things that, people struggle with. And so
what was it about that conversation that had those layers fall away, that kind of activated that healer inside of you? What caused the transformation?
Understanding that someone else had experienced the space of being outside their body and knowing that that wasn't the end, which I already had that faith and that belief, but being in that space of actually being with someone who had experienced that and knowing that came with that made a huge difference for me. Knowing that I could continue to progress and that I was going to learn and that I wasn't held to whatever I had learned here, that when I go and take my turn on the other side, that I'm going to have this opportunity to continue to grow, I think was huge.
So it was kind of a confirmation of things that you had believed in, but now you had some stronger evidence that
had some stronger evidence, I think, is a really good way of explaining that. I think also being in the space of someone who also had that strong belief also helped a lot.
It was interesting to me. Every time I've shared my experience verbally to people, there's usually a team of spiritual guides who step in and help me understand which version, because there's my experience, but it takes so long to go over that they'll give me the high points, the points that I really need to express. And there was a big team for yours, and I could tell just from that's what was going on. It was had nothing to do with me or you. It was about these teams working together, making some things happen.
That's the other part of it that was a huge inspiration to me, was that other people needed to understand this message. They needed this in their lives. It wasn't just me that needed to hear your story, that everyone needed to hear your story, and they needed to have that same experience and that opportunity to connect to what God has for them and what needs to happen with their lives, and the opportunities that are just waiting. There's so much out there and so much available for us to try and to experience and to be involved in, and grow that learning that comes from those things.
I think people underestimate how important it is to share your story, because so many people relate. Like, people want to be seen. Mm-hmm. You never know what sharing your story does, and someone's like, oh my gosh, they understand too. And it opens people up, allows people to want to share their stories, which then have caveats that connect with other people. So very cool.
I think many people believe that they're the one and only on that journey.
Yep.
And as they hear others having similar journeys, it helps them to not feel so alone.
Yeah.
Absolutely does.
And I think that it's interesting that when you start a journey, how it changes over time, and that we have these perceptions around here's how it's supposed to be and here's where it ends up is very different.
Mm-hmm.
So from that conversation, that kind of what sparked you to encourage Vinney and work with Vinney to get his story out.
That's a really nice way of saying I pestered the crap out of Vinney and kept on him for years, literally, and just said, Vinney, what are we doing? Vinney, how can we help? How can we do this? So Vinney did just an audio recording of his experience, and he sent it to my wife and I. Yep. And we spent some time working on that, mostly Susan, transcribing that into a written format. And at that point, Vinney was having a conversation with this guy next to me.
So hand that back over to you, where we were at another writing retreat at the same ranch.
Yeah, another writing retreat at the same ranch.
4 years ago.
And I'd ask, I have my own spiritual guidance team that I work with every day. Every moment, can't run away from them, can't curse them away. They're always there with me wherever I go. So I just have to learn to get along. And this team I've learned to work with and work really well with. And this team I've asked, is this person supposed to help me write my book? And I've met some pretty amazing people over the years, and each time the answer was always no. And one day in passing at a writing retreat, I was very impressed with this little writing exercise that Mr. Lynn Taylor did. And as he was reading it, I had the thought, wow, he's a really good writer. I wonder if he's supposed to help me write my book. And just that passing thought, I heard a yes. And I had to whoa, stop the roll, slow your roll. What's going on? Yes. I'd heard literally over 1,000 no's. And that was the first yes. And I asked again and got a very strong yes. And that's when I walked up to him and said, hey, Lynn, I think you're supposed to help me write my book.
Yeah, I still remember this. We were sitting in a couple bean bags after lunch just talking about things, and I said, hey, you help me write my book? And yes just felt like the right answer. And I've been trying to not say yes to so many things, but so I surprised myself, and but it felt like the right answer. And so we went to work on it and got a hold of the transcript you guys had put together, and didn't realize it at the time, but I also had a team that helped me through that whole process, and Drake became part of that team.
And his team's growing by the day.
Yeah, and we're getting better connected.
It's turning into a spiritual posse pretty much.
Yeah.
I like that.
Yeah.
Connect to that.
They're, yeah, very. Now that I'm aware, so here's the thing, though, is that this team has been with me my whole life. I just didn't recognize it.
Yep.
And it was through this process. The way I like to put it is, while I was working on the book was working on me.
Mm-hmm.
And it took us about 1.5 years to get it written. And Vinney and I talked hours every week,
Mm-hmm.
just about different things, and I could talk for
Many,
hours about those
many
conversations.
nights burned up in those conversations.
Oh yeah,
Or invested. I like that better.
invested
Many nights
good.
invested in those conversations.
And only a little bit of all that made it in the book. There was so much more that we
Yeah.
covered that we just couldn't fit in there. We've got plans for other books in the future that'll go into greater detail, but we had to be very selective what went in that first one. But through that process, I became aware of my team and how they communicate with me, and strengthen that connection with God and spiritual impressions, and my life has not been the same since. And that learning was actually key when meeting the other member of our team.
Thank you for that intro. My name is Lindsay Young. I'm the communications director at Living God's Light. And Lynn is referring to the story of me. So my previous job before working with these gentlemen, I did marketing for a company that we worked with government, the commissioners is who I worked for. I'm trying to spit out exactly what it was, but
yeah, working with so I, at the time, working in county government, and so it was the county commissioners. They had used this marketing company to help get some messaging out and help connect with the public.
Yeah, so I mainly was connected with the commissioners, but there was times that I would work with other people, in the office. And so one day we are shooting a video for elections. And we have to make some signs, and I go up to this room to go draw up some signs for the video, and there's Lynn in that room. So it's just him and I, and we're creating signs, and we start talking, and naturally I almost knew, like right when I asked, like, hey, how are you? Hi, I'm Lynn, I'm Lindsay, and we made our intros, but I was like, so what do you like to do outside of this? What do you do outside of work? What do you love to do? And he said, well, I'm writing a book, or I wrote a book. And in my heart, I've always known that I want to write a book too. So I perked right up and was like, tell me more. And he said, well, I think you tiptoed around it a little bit because you weren't sure how I was going to take, the spiritual aspect of it. And I was like, well, it's a book about near-death experiences. And I was like, cool. Yeah, I want to know more. Anyways, that conversation progressed, and it got really deep, really awesomely fast. And we were in there for a while chatting about really just meaningful subjects. And so it was a cool connection moment for Lynn and I. And also, I'll let you tell the part about where your team piped up and you really got to know them in that moment.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. All right, here we go.
It's all about authenticity, brother.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm still not super used to this. So Lindsay starts asking about, and we're in a work setting, and I'm not super sure about talking about this book I was writing, spiritual stuff, but Lindsay's just asking all these questions. And I'm reaching out to Spirit, and I'm getting all green lights. Go ahead. And I have never covered so many weird topics in such a short period of time with anybody in my life.
It was awesome.
It was awesome. I
And you kept
loved
up
it
the whole time.
Yeah.
Yeah, and she was all over that. So we just kept going. And then she tells me about her brother who had passed away in a car accident a few years beforehand.
Mm-hmm.
She's telling me about this, and that's really about all she said. And it had been really hard for her family and her mom and her especially. And then I recognized this presence. And this was a new thing to me, but I had learned about this through writing the book and experienced it a little bit. But I knew it was her brother. I just knew. And as soon as I was aware, he says, hi, tell her I love her. And my response was, no.
Nope.
This is not what I do.
No, honestly, I was like, Vinney does that? I don't do that. And he says, no, dude, just tell her hi, tell her I love her. I'm like, no, dude, really, I'm not comfortable with this at all. And then he leans in and he goes, you know I'm here. Just tell her hi, tell her I love her. And I'm like, oh, okay. Lindsay, your brother says hi, and he loves you. And your response at that point was?
I mean, I froze up. I was like, what? But my heart knew exactly what you said, believed it, knew it, and it was almost just like everything filled with love, but really just like, oh my gosh, I believe you. And it was a special moment for me to just recognize this person I had met 45 minutes before that, was delivering a message from my brother who had passed 3 years prior. And it was such a cool connection moment between us. And I know Lynn was apprehensive to say it. I could see it. I could see it on his face. So I really appreciated it. But then he comes out and says, go on.
So meanwhile, while she's processing all of this, I'm still talking to her brother. I'm like, okay, dude, you got to know I'm super new at this. And I've kind of a scientist engineer type brain. And
kind of.
So, very. Can you give me something to help me know that I'm not just making this up? And he says, okay. Baseball. I'm like, what am I supposed to do with that? Baseball? What? So I'm like, well, you asked for something, baseball. Okay. I said, Lindsay, I'm super new at this and kind of taking a chance, but did your brother like baseball? And she just starts.
Well, and little did he know that's the most loaded word you could use to describe my brother.
Yeah, she hadn't mentioned it, but go ahead, tell us about
Yeah, I hadn't mentioned it, but my little brother played a lot of baseball. He played baseball in high school. He was on super leagues all growing up, did a ton of traveling, went to Stanford baseball camps. He was all over it. And it was really kind of the gift that he gave all of us, was a lot of memories at baseball games, a lot of, baseball fundraisers. It was a connection tool for my parents and him and our whole family. And so when he said that, it was, the waterworks turned on, and I just knew that he was telling the truth. I felt my brother in that room. It was so amazing. But all in all, that's when Lynn and I connected, and I was like, that was no accident. We walked out of that office together, and he handed me a book, The Light After Death, and he said, here's my book. Today was no accident. And I said, nope, it wasn't.
Yeah. Didn't know you'd end up here, did you?
Nope. And here I am on the panel with these guys.
She's on the crazy train. Choo choo.
And it's so fun. I love it. And, shortly after, he introduced me to Vinney. Yep. And I'd had some recent tragic events in my life, and these guys have been amazing to help me through it and see me and help me move forward.
Yeah. It was pretty awesome though. The day that all happened, you called. We had a call scheduled that night.
Oh yeah, because that was.
So we were talking, and he was like, "I need to ask you something," and I'm all yes. I'm like, "But I didn't ask you." I'm like, "Yes," and you're like, "Wait, you don't even know what I'm going to ask him." I'm like, "Yes, I do. Yes," and he knew that he was going to ask if we could set up a meeting with Lindsay, and it was it was like a consensus. All my guidance team was saying this needed to happen.
And one of the things I want to point out is through that experience, so I felt like I was taking a huge risk. First of all, it was a little risk talking about these things, but I was getting these impressions that, go ahead and do it. And then in that moment, when your brother showed up, that was very uncomfortable for me, but through that process, leaning into that discomfort, it ended up being a confirmation to me that yes, things have changed in my awareness, in my life, and that experience gave me the kind of the last step that I needed to really accept and understand that I'd pretty much entered a whole new world here. Mm-hmm. And when I say my life hasn't been the same since, it's these sorts of experiences, this awareness of everything that there is beyond our physical senses, that if we connect to that, it magnifies our life so much.
Oh, immensely. And just being able to work with you guys at Living God's Light. That's why it was so exciting to make that connection and see how it developed, because that's, my heart was just, freshly wounded from a death. My husband passed away. And so it was almost a saving grace for me to connect with you that day, because that's all I wanted to know in those moments was like, God, help me understand, help me. I know I'm not supposed to have all the answers, but can you just lead me, guide me in some direction? And then, you make connections, God puts people in your path, and I've never felt more fulfilled in a job placement, but also with friends and people I'm surrounded by. So this is where I'm supposed to be.
That's awesome. Well, that's pretty much the team.
That's the team, and these experiences are essentially what we are as an organization. Living God's Light is an organization, a nonprofit that we have set out as our mission to help people connect to their own inner divinity, because we all have that inner divinity there, and many of us believe we have to go outside ourselves for that, and we don't. Our greatest connection to our Creator, to our source, to the universe, whatever you want to call it, is in here. Yeah.
And I should clarify, when I say this is the team, this is like part of the team. I actually have a much larger team, and really Living God's Light itself is a community that's growing. And I'd like to invite you to be an active part of the Living God's Light community. And you can do that through livinggodslight.com. You can sign up there, and on the website, there's many ways that you can connect and be part of that and help to spread that light throughout the world. Anything else you'd like to say right now before we wrap up for this session?
I love that we get to be a part of a force for good in a pretty crazy universe, pretty crazy world. There's a lot of not so positive forces out there. I love that I get to be a part of what I feel is a heaven sent or a blessed organization to help others. And I love that. I'm very grateful to be a part of that.
Alan, anything you want to add?
I think it's really important to remember that we all have spiritual gifts and that we all have that ability to connect to what God wants for us, and that He has our best interests at heart, and that we just need to be able to trust ourselves enough that we're feeling that and that we're hearing those things that He wants us to hear.
Yeah. Lindsay?
Yeah. I think it's important to know that everyone's journey is different. Everyone's on a different path. Everyone's, just has a pre-planned contract is how I believe it. But that we're all on the journey together. We're all kind of one and part and cut from the same cloth, but everyone's got different avenues they're going, but we're all looking for similar things. And when you find your tribe, it's pretty great. You have confidence to move forward and be who you are.
Awesome. Thank you, everybody. And thank you for joining us on this episode of the Living God's Light podcast. Hope it's been wonderful for you. I've really loved this.
Mm-hmm.
And remember to like and subscribe. And if you're on YouTube, click the bell. And we look forward to talking to you next time.
Thank you for joining us on the Living God's Light podcast. You can help keep the show going through getting merch at livinggodslight.com or contributing what you think the show is worth on our website or by going through Patreon. Thank you for sharing your light with the world. You are making a difference, and we love you.